Hombre.
Sí, voy con el papel, entonces mejor tener las dos manos así para no estar con...
Ahí.
Sí.
Vale. Bueno, pero no te... Bueno, hablamos...
Sí, pero me siento...
Quédate aquí, así. Buena tarde. Buena tarde. Bueno, de nuevo gracias y bienvenidos a esta sexta sesión de Cicle Europa Europa 2. A partir de ahora ya será todas las semanas, o sea que faltan 2 jueves más, aparte de este, y ya cerramos el ciclo. Hoy tenemos el placer de tener a Sam Chermayeff. Welcome Sam, and thank you for coming. Y también le paso la palabra a Igor Urdampilleta de arquitectura-G, bueno, que lo presentará porque primero que son amigos y segundo que han trabajado juntos, o sea que lo conoce muy bien. Gracias, Igor.
Gracias, Moisés. ¿Se oye? So, good evening. I want to start by saying I'm going to read. Good evening. I want to start by saying that Sam is a really good friend and that speaking about him in front of a crowd is difficult for me, so I will be very brief. I know his work very well, not only because I admire it deeply, but because we talk about it constantly. We love discussing architecture and can spend hours doing so. We have also worked together, which has given to me the chance to understand better his way of designing and thinking. For those who don't know him, Sam is a die-hard New Yorker, 43 years old. He studied in Texas, but the most significant part of his learning process was working closely with Sisena before moving to Berlin, where he first founded June 14 and later his own studio. I believe Sam's work is about creating moments, whether he's designing a triangular bed or a 40-story tower in Tirana. His architecture is full of accidents that generate unique experiences. One of the things that I admire most about him is the way he looks at the world. He always approaches things from a different perspective, rethinking everything from scratch and never taking anything for granted. Every time I visit him, I see his way of doing reflected in his own home. He lives and works in a building he designed himself, filled with those moments we talk about. There are no simple partitions, spaces emerge from the encounter of volumes, creating connections and relations between them. His studio is in one apartment, his home in another, and he parked his Mercedes S-Class, which also happens to be a sauna right in front. And every time I step into his home, everything has changed completely since my last visit. A different layout, a new kitchen, and different objects he has designed or found that shape new situations. To me, his architecture is exactly that. A space in constant tension, shaped by the same forces that define his own home. A while ago, in an interview for Apartamento magazine, Sam said that every morning you should be able to dance with your toaster. I believe he dances with his architecture, and that he is a great dancer. And tonight, I would love for all of us to dance with him for a while. Thank you.
Let's, oh wow, I'm getting bordering on emotional. Thank you, Igor. And thanks, Moises. Thank you for having me. And it's really, really nice to be called a European. It's kind of the dream of all Americans. It's like I'm not anymore American, and now I'm like Europa Part 2. It's like, it feels like cheating, but it's half true. I didn't know what, wow, there's so many of you. And a lot of you look vaguely familiar, which is also fun. I somehow spend a lot of time here in the last 10 years, and it became kind of a second home in a way. And it's true that I talk with Igor and Aitor and probably other people in this room constantly about architecture. I want to talk today about everything, but try to distill it down to one, let's say, little problem, like a kind of fight with myself, a fight with Igor, a fight with Aitor, a kind of endless fight about, okay, sometimes I want to be really clear. right? Sometimes I come to a clear idea, but in fact, I'm very, very good at arranging little things freely. So half of my work is like, let's see how we put disparate things together to make experiences, as Igor just suggested. And sometimes it hits the mark, and sometimes it doesn't need to. And I'm deeply unsure about that. So I think maybe I like share my own personal debates with you guys about it. I start with this photo because when in doubt, like you drill a hole in a rock and you put a candle or you make a shelf, or it works for a lot of things and it's very satisfying immediately. But then it's of course much better as an arrangement, and you wouldn't care about the rock on the wall individually or a candle sticking out. So I sort of start that debate with myself, like, does it need to be fussy, or is it also good enough on its own? And that I never know. This thing is apparently good on its own because it's been I'm famous for it, so I just talk about it now. Like, I made this triangle bed, and now there are about like 10, maybe 15 people buy them. I let people make them, and I say, and then they generally call back and say, can you figure out how to make the sheets? Even though I said I could do it, I can't because it doesn't fit right. And I mastered it. They shrink by 5%, so you just have to make it 5% bigger. It works out fine. There's slight variations on the shape, but it does several things that become clear in a lot of our projects together. It does really nice things to the rest of the room. So itself, the bed makes odd spaces in itself inside the bed, which I come to, but it also leaves the rest of the room somehow open for other uses, even if there's not a lot of space. So I don't need to have a pointer, but all four corners can somehow become something else in the way that a rectangular bed, for whatever reason, doesn't allow, because it has direction and so forth, and that somehow that triangle, even though I draw it with direction because I don't want to cheat too much, it somehow works. And then of course itself makes other spaces, right? So on the one hand, it's kind of like at a certain moment it was more orgy than family, and now it's more family than orgy, but it works both ways. And one begets the other, of course. And it's very free. And that brings me to another project about triangles making the space that I did together with Igor and Aitor, who are sitting here, and Jonathan and Jordi, who I think are also, or at least Jordi's here. So we did this thing for Flos in Amsterdam, which is totally nice, and you should go see it. I don't know if anybody ever sees it because it's in an office park in the middle of nowhere on the 3rd floor. So you really have to put it in your agenda now for your next trip to Amsterdam. They'll show it to you, but you won't run across it. And here, we're just sketching in the beginning, and we got this job who we were recommended by Omar Sosa, who was Apartamento, and then and that's how we got connected to Flos. And just like the bed, somehow, in a really loose sketch, maybe the size of a postcard, there was a triangle in the middle, because for the same reason as the bed, it leaves sort of quality spaces, that space kind of works, and that space kind of works if you put a triangle there, and so on, right? It's kind of obvious. And then these guys here, and I'm going to show so many models that are in fact made in Barcelona because we work on a lot of things together. But so these guys started to make the model, and they equally fast made a model of many things, including that sketch that I had made, and somehow, and the sketch was totally agnostic about what it was. It wasn't even a spatial idea. It was just me. I always draw a triangle. It doesn't mean anything, actually. But then suddenly it became material. So suddenly the paper, and then it was put together in this model in kind of a lazy way. And that laziness became the thing that it was actually meant to be. So what we started to do was, okay, figure out how do we make this paper model in real, so to speak. Not just how do we make this paper, how do we scale this thing up? And so what we did for Flos is we made a paper model out of 6 mil steel. I think it could have been 5. I think Igor and Aitor agree about that. But and it really bends. It really bends a lot, and that's what kind of makes it beautiful. It works just like the paper. And then we started welding it together in the space. and it's just strapped to the floor, and it's got these little sticks, and it moves like crazy. And of course, it's a showroom for light. So what it is, I mean, it looks beautiful just welded, and that's just so you can understand what it all is. But then it goes on to be just simple walls that can receive light. We don't really have good photographs, I realize now, with the lights, which I think we need as to tell this story. But imagine there are lights around lighting the walls, right? And this I think is like back to the kind of premise of the lecture. Like, I think that this is one where it's both arranging, and it's also like a clear as day notion that we're making planes to cast shadows and to make light. And so in that sense, it feels clear and uncertain in the best possible sense. All right, I have so many slides. And then another really old thing. I'm going to get to. There's plenty of new things coming, but I didn't know how to cook. I'm not sure that I'm a great cook now, but I do like cooking. So not knowing how to cook, I wasn't at all worried about like the functionality of a kitchen as a first starting point. I mean, as you can see, there's a very expensive light on top of a stove that therefore you can't use the stove. But it crossed my mind that like, why not deconstruct the kitchen? And so I'm still attracted to this idea, and I just kind of figured out like, oh yeah, I'll just arrange the things that I need. And there wasn't even a bathroom. This is in Brando Huber's house many years ago, and he was like, look, if you can pee in the sink too. You know, it had like all kinds of extra things. But this deconstruction became like a huge part of my work, and this is the uncertainty part, because it's not exactly practical. I show these drawings because I like how, I don't even know whether it's Rhino or what, because I don't use it, but I just like that the program automatically differentiates the program, the drafting program differentiates the functional program, right? And so what I've been doing is trying to kind of divide out functions to be like, okay, what does a sink want to be? And it turns out, of course, that like the reason why we draw kitchens as offset lines comes from the Nazis. And I live in Germany, and I love making fun of the Germans. And so they really did decide to uniform everything, right? Meaning they really decided that it should be 90 high so that you can fit a stove with an oven under it. And then the machines that they made in one side of Germany fit in the boxes that they made in the other side of Germany. And now that's what we do in the entire world. Like, that's what IKEA is, that's what Reform is, and like can be quite nicely wrapped. And there's a million ways to do it, but in principle, we don't have to do that. I mean, sometimes in Spain you find like cooktops that are low, which are super nice. And so it turns out that I started to study that and make kitchens out of that. And then I started to put it back together. So back to the kind of clarity. And then I realized that the other goal is to have people gather, to have like attention across things, and to not ever face walls, to not, I bring back the kitchen island, and then it, becomes like the male stage again in a bad way. But it's also clear that that thing has no direction, and that as a result makes for a very cohesive a party, simply. So it works always as a kind of mess. It's particularly good. And we continue with that, and I continue with the triangle. Same story with the space, except this has like the other advantage that if you do the dishes, you're facing the person cooking, and you're also all the time looking out the window. In this particular apartment, you have to imagine that the windows are the left and the right, and as they are in many apartments. So for us, this kind of thing became something about communality and something about kind of deconstruction. But the deconstruction allowed us to figure out that you can put it back together however you want. Right, and so they're just drawings, but there are fucking hundreds of them, and we do like 10 at a time, all the time. They take like little houses, so they take years and years. It also comes from, somehow in Berlin, people didn't have money and so forth. And when I first opened an office, nobody was willing to like really redo their apartments. So basically, I was like, I'm not going to decide what color to paint your wall. I'm going to make you a kitchen, and you figure out your wall color, and that works. And we do bathrooms too. And these, some newer ones where we started to make you know, we start to cook on the table, apropos the Spanish height, and it turns out to be better for cooking, like, period. It's nicer to cook at 72 centimeters plus the height of the grill, which is about 8, and so you're like at 80, it's much nicer. And even if you're tall, it's still nice to look down into the pot and not like up over the pot, and to stir like this versus like this. It's quite clear. Again, the Germans thought industry was more important, and then you have raw colors. They're all bad raw colors, you know. I mean, so it's the same movement, it's the same year, it's the same choice that ruined, well, a lot of things for a lot of us. And then with Arno, we make a giant refrigerator. So again, like kind of taking things apart and putting them back together, and then taking it apart again. This is in a Frei Otto building. And this same thing about communality, but also, let's say, celebrating different functions, right? So you kind of recognize that kitchens are in fact full of like in little activities that you have to engage with. And then I just switched gears slightly. Probably I know some of you saw this because it was here in Spain with Luis Sandino. He didn't show up, did he? No. Ostensibly, he's still my gallerist. And we did this show called Beasts, which, you know, it's unclear to me. Is like, is it about the arrangements? Is it about, it is, it's always about, right? It's always about arranging the whole thing, like meaning that those two chairs and the black chair. But it's also like jamming a table and a streetlight together is what makes the story. And I think that part of my work, maybe it's not happening anymore. Like, we're not putting a seat on a shoebox at the moment. I still think it's good, and people still want that from us. But then I care more about, just in general, like the fact of the togetherness, right? I care more about, like, okay, the fact of making two people sit together. You know, it doesn't matter anymore that the fact that table is attached to that chair. I don't think it's important, right? I think just like that two people talk makes complete sense, and that's maybe more the point. And thanks to my publishers. No, did Nacho show up? No, but I thank him anyway, because since I have Barcelona publishers. And so we're experimenting. Last year we did an experiment with tents in Milan, where we tried. I don't know anything about tents. I'm from Manhattan, so I don't. You know, I'm from the 13th floor, the unlucky number in America. But nonetheless, I'm from the 13th floor, and so that one on the left is kind of like an awning from Manhattan, if that, you know, resonates with anybody. But then the rest was just a kind of series of experiments about how to like bring tents into like classic typology, to be like, what fundamentally are they? What do they feel like? How do they work? How do the tensions work? How does the structure work? And we got Maharam, this nice company, to sponsor us and give us lots of fabric, and we built lots of tents. And so, in a sense, I'm trying to research type. I do want, apropos the kitchens, even the towers that are coming and everything else, I want like my children, and your children too, if you have them, like I want like a 2-year-old to understand what I do. Right? It's like really, really important that a 2-year-old's like, hey, I get that. That tent reminds you of the circus. That tent reminds you of this. And it sort of works. And then if you try like the one on the bottom right, like if you try to make one that isn't quite typological, it doesn't work. Like it doesn't, it's like I could never get it to stand up. Like if you don't follow the kind of logic of it. And sort of talking more about design, and I come back to architecture. The buildings grow in size over this thing. But I have time, I think. So Florence Knoll made these credenzas that are everywhere, and she kind of defined the modern American office, this kind of SOM mid-century thing. And it turns out that people don't spend money on offices in the same way as they used to. And offices, I mean, the pandemic, yada yada yada. I mean, the workplace is like much more domestic. Even if it's in an office building, even if you go there and you live somewhere else, it's still like Google and ping pong tables and so forth. So I started to rethink this piece of furniture from like what started out as an office piece to a domestic piece. And I started off in a very kind of modernist tone, meaning, and we do this together with with Noel, and in theory, Florence, I mean, she's dead, of course, but I try to respect her details. And I try to say, like, no, the thing that she designed is actually a system for everywhere, like USM or Vitso, right? And so we started to make bar cabinets and bookcases and sideboards, and then it's called an occasional table. I don't know why, but it's a coffee table and a chest and a bed and a place. Believe it or not, none of those those wooden boxes are big enough to hang clothes in. So what we're trying to do here is like rejigger the domestic. Okay, we changed some details slightly just to shine it up a little. And then I let the Knoll people decide what it's made out of, following the existing Knoll rules. And then they start changing it around. And we start making from like really a small move of how you think about, like, let's say personal space, the body, our houses, because everything's about living, right? Sometimes I wish that I was in like a Mies van der Rohe time and making towers in Park Avenue that were dead straight and logical and even floor plans, and I like a lighting grid as much as the next guy. But that's not really available. And then another kind of thing that happens with this, with Knoll, and I kind of pitched that. They were like, what do you want to do? I keep expecting somebody to give me a brief to say, like, the world needs new clothing cabinets, but nobody ever says that, so you have to like talk about it forever, and then you get there. And this was like, the world does not need plates, but they do sell more of that table than anything else. And that table cost a fortune. And believe it or not, they don't do anything with the rest of it. Like, they just cut that oval out, and the corner gets in a pile, and there are hundreds of them. So we're making plates. We're making marble plates, same company, almost the same detail. I mean, it's a plate, so it works like that. And this is a funny thing. You know, I said, like, how thin can you get it? And, you know, of course, because I worked at Sana, I thought, like, oh, thin, super thin marble plate cut out of the leftovers from Sarn, and it's perfect. And then a mistake, which happens to me all the time from working for Sejima, is I made it too thin, and it looks bad. Because it does. Because first of all, I'm not Japanese. I'm not a little Japanese lady, and so then I realize, and then everybody started doubting. I was like, no, just make it thicker again. It'll be fine, and it is fine. But sometimes, you know, then back to the little Japanese things. Like, sometimes it works out, and this is one of the times that it works out. This vase that maybe some of you have seen. It's the only thing that I ever sell, like, at all. It's not possible to make not even like enough. I give away more by far than I sell. That's not true. I mean, I pay more for the ones that I give away than I ever get back from the ones that I sell, is what I think I mean by that. I'm still in like a negotiation, but it doesn't matter. I like them, and the point is that even the most regular one can hold like a little flower, and it can hold like a huge branch. And I'm not an engineer, and I just got lucky with that thing. Like, it's by far the best thing that I've ever designed, because it really, really works pitch perfectly. I recommend it. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just saying it works. Like, it's just like that angle. It just turns out to be strong enough to hold like a branch. And if you can do it going backwards. Oh, none of these have it. But if you do 2 glasses, you can like weight it, and you can have it. You can go 2 meters in the air, and that little tiny thing holds it, and it's really light. All right, I am American. You know, I started selling it. This is quite a nice thing. It's there's these fantastic fashion designers called Bless, who are of kind of German French origin, and they asked me, because I made a sauna on the roof, which I'm not showing a long time ago. That's very cool, and I made some other saunas. So I like making saunas. I like the body. That's kind of clear. I like a technical, you know, Stockstrom, as they say in German. I don't know how do you say strong power in Spanish? Like 3-phase. All right, it's just 3-phase. All right. Anyway, the point is that they asked me to make a sauna in front of the thing that looks like what I already do, except it's better. Right, meaning Dan Graham Pavilion, like the only one in the whole world that is actually a cafe and actually architecture and actually useful. And so it's like the perfect building. And then they had this like hippy dippy, very nicely done garden this photo doesn't express that, but you can imagine somebody asked me to figure out a new object between something that I had two things that I kind of admire and work, and I figured out that this was the in-between. Like, this is the only thing that I could come up with, which was cool in there. And so we built a sauna in a golden S-Class, which I, as Igor pointed out, is now my daily driving car. The beads cannot be removed. People ask me all the time, like, did you take the beads out? I'm like, of course not. But it got really hot, and it got, it gets like 97 degrees in there. I mean, it's fucking works, right? And you turn on that timer, and by the time that timer is done, you want to get out. I mean, it's hot. And people ask me all the time, like, you mean you strangers sweat in your car, man? Like, that's not reasonable. Yeah, but it's dry heat, It's a dry heat. So, like, it evaporates, and it doesn't fuck up the electrics because it's a dry heat. Just like that. Like, that's how saunas work. So you can, and of course, Mercedes is like, that's what they did. They made it so you could also park it in the Dubai desert if you wanted to. It turns out that it's actually more comfy in the summer as a kind of cooling device than as a sauna, from my point of view. And Bless is, their fashion designer. So then they took pictures of the car and put it on blankets and T-shirts. I got them to make a little T-shirt for my kid, and my son only sleeps with this blanket. So my son sleeps in like Papa's car blanket, like he insists on. So it's like a weird world. But I want to mess around with cars. Cars are something very beautiful and something also worth forgetting about, right? So really basic thing. I like the idea of cars not as a private show-off thing, which they still are. But also as a kind of semi-public thing. So another exhibition that we made in Milan was called Cars in the Public Joy, wherein we made a kind of suction cup that held a little shade on it, so you could gather around the corner of this car, or this chair is relevant. We made a table that mounted on the corner of many cars, and I've done it now like 10 times, but still these are the best photos, and a little place where you could have a drink on the side of this motorcycle, so that this private thing becomes a public thing. And I'm interested in that shift wherever it's possible to do. Right, the same thing where like somebody does their makeup in the corner of this car park, basically. And then this is a little quote from Bless, because Bless, and I just thought it's one of my favorite failures. It's also one of the more expensive ones. So I basically I had this idea that we should remake a vacuum cleaner like really beautifully. And I did, and I spent, as you can imagine, I get high on my own supply, and I ask the steel guy time by time when I have, a couple extra bucks to like make a shiny whatever. Mostly I sell them, and mostly I feign having a business. But in this case, I thought, like, I want to resolve this vacuum cleaner thing. And she just says, and I said, can we do this together and Bless? And I wanted them to make the pillow on the top to like look like something. And she just said, it looks like you're made by a very sophisticated vacuum cleaner company. That's a direct quote. And that was like the end of it. What she meant by that was like, don't do that. Don't. And I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, of course, you can imagine I wanted to wheel around, and I wanted it as a seat, and I give furniture that you don't mind having, and then it's not fun anymore. So that's a lot of small stuff, and then that is like 125,000 square meters of different projects jammed together that we're building in Albania. And that's really quite fun. I'll start with this one, which has a building permission. It's called Sun, Moon, Star. And it's 44 stories tall. But it's not, I start with this because it's not altogether different from the kitchen thing, right? It's not altogether, it's pretty much the same strategy as the kitchens, just turned big. This is the assignment. There was a kind of existing house. They wanted some office building. They wanted some hotel. They wanted some rich people housing. They wanted some cheap housing. They wanted some other things. They said, maybe you could have a sign. Maybe there's a clock. That's it, right? Which is to say, that's it. It's like they wanted everything and the kitchen sink. That's an expression in English, like throw everything in the kitchen sink. I see blank looks from that. Sorry. But so the point is that they asked for huge number of program in like a block in like, so basically, and then they were like, it's got to be 44 stories tall, and it's got to be X number of square meters. And so there was kind of no volume choice, right? And it was just like, okay, what do you have? Let's do it. And so what we end up with is like office, looking pretty officey, like hotel, it has like stepped individual balconies. There's a restaurant. These are the biggest flats. And then here I have duplex flats, because I can. And it's like Le Corbusier, one stack of it. The Albanians don't understand that, and they give that to me as a kind of, like, you can try to make it unité in the middle of this building if you want to, which I did. And then here is like quite normal ones. Here's like the sign, and then those are the penthouses. And it's actually pretty clear. Like that's like half the price of that. And then there's a clock on the top, and I'm pretty happy about it. Maybe I should have shown it. The model photo is so much better. Sorry, I should have stood by the model photo. Doesn't matter. And Eddie Rama likes it. I'm super happy with it. Starts construction, has 80 centimeter columns on the corner. Seems in Albania with all of our projects we just have 80 centimeter columns where they're columns regardless of how high it is. Just I can't explain that. I already told you about the program. And it's actually been really fun adjusting and arranging. I mean, to go back to the kind of title of this lecture, like the arrangements start to become the story, right? So the arrangement, and then, is it one thing? Is it too arranged? I talked to Brenda Huber about it. He said you should actually copy and paste one facade from somewhere and one facade from somewhere, and I tried and I couldn't figure that out. It just says "Happy Birthday, Mother," but it's a digital sign, not unlike this thing, so you can say whatever you want. But I think I like it. I think I do. I think I like the arranging. I mean, I feel very comfortable arranging. I feel very flexible about it, and it feels to me, apropos the kitchens, like you could, later I could decide that there has to be one more floor of hotel and one less of office and so on. But of course that's not true because it's a tower. So I don't know if that flexibility kind of resonates or not. And then we got another project, which is just 300 meters to the left, which we call Fruit Depot because there's a Fruit Depot on the site now. And this one, I started out with arrangements in many volumes and so on. And what we came to, is like the most reasonable thing. And this guy said, I want middle-class housing. So the assignment really matters. And apparently I listen to my clients, although I don't notice myself doing that, but I do. And so what happens here is just the same room repeated 450 times. And 450 balconies, and every single room gets the same balcony. I mean, there's some minor mix-up, but there's 4 shafts. And like, if you can imagine that each of the 24 sides is 390. And it makes, I just finished that plan, and we have got only the first permission for it. And again, the 80 by 80 columns, which I can't totally explain, but it fits the parking perfectly, and it works out. And I guess like the moment that I come to you now is like this moment that's happening where I'm trying and I'm excited about getting to clarity. So, there was Beasts a couple years ago, and now it's Florence Knoll. I'm just trying to tweak the existing. Here I'm trying to find like what's obvious and practical and readable and clear. And I think I can resolve that facade because it's only one time, one everything. Back to arranging. It's here. This is like a little beach house for a couple friends in New York, in the place called the Rockaways, which is. Did I include that? No, sorry. It's in New York in a place called the Rockaways, which is, if you've ever been to New York, you've been almost there because it's right next to JFK, but it's not under where the planes go because that's very loud. It's like it's like 500 meters from a very loud place. But basically it's a little beach house, there we thought to do a kind of kitchen dining living as this free shape, and then to have what I call like a motel typology for tiny sleeping rooms with Jack and Jill bathrooms, Jack and Jill is such a nice American expression, where you have like the bathroom in between two rooms and two doors. That's, I don't know what you call that in Spain, but it can't be as good as Jack and Jill. And so you end up with this very, very clear and simple kind of diagram that, again, I think my kids can read. Of course, at the time I was inspired by this Frei Otto building that was Oko House. The unbuilt one in Stuttgart has this idea of like building these very strange shaped floor plates. And I just figured out after years, and I already have a building permission for this, and it's coming because Igor's going to be like, when does it start? No, and like you have to do it now, later today. But it's already happening. And then I finally figured out Frei Otto's actual one, because it's in a flood zone, so it has to be lifted off the ground. I should have explained that. Like it will flood, so that's why it's all on sticks. But basically I thought that it would be like this little piece of land, like a little kind of an island, and like as Frei Otto had done with Oko House, and I would infill it with my little part, and then the motel would read like it would to my little kid or any little kid as a motel, and then you'd have this kind of clarity. And I think, I mean, the big news is, of course, I went to Frei Otto's archive recently and looked it up, his totally free shape, unbuilt Oko House project, which is fascinating, and it is a perfectly strict rational grid and not at all a free shape. It just like looks like a free shape, and it's so much better than mine, and it's worth sharing. And next lecture I will show the Frei Otto one, which is in fact like a totally functional grid. It's worth looking up. You can check it on, like, I will have it on my own somewhere soon enough to like be like, oh, that. So you can't just invent free shapes when you see them, turns out. Speaking of inventing shapes, we just won, it's actually not, it's September, we won a competition for, with Muto and Bauku for two huge buildings, also in Albania. One is, I wonder why I put my little house in between Albania. Maybe it's because I'm overwhelmed by the size of Albania, and it's also like overwhelming the office, and it makes you crazy, the Albanian bubble. It's very, very, very interesting, and also slightly unhealthy to go from like kitchen to tower every one day to the next. But this is kind of a fun building where there's what's red is existing, and then they ask for all kinds of other program, and we're adding a giant building over and around an existing building and making a public space on the roof. This is a Pier Paolo sketch from Vicenza, Palladio, where he's trying to claim that that's what a public building should be, which is totally debatable. But it's certainly in the world of clarity as opposed to in the world of arranging. I like to think that, of course, inside of it, then it starts to become an arrangement. But it's also quite clear. It's also these quite rational bars, and it makes sort of sense how it comes together. So there's offices on the outside, two bays, above and below, and then the existing is like meeting rooms, and there's a little bit of light that comes in, and then the second from the bottom, kind of do need a pointer. So that's mostly in the dark, and it's an archive, which they have. It's also like a big deal to make the cadastre offices in a post-communist country, because they really need the cadastre office. Every plot, including that plot, is divided into 20 little plots with lost paperwork from God knows when. And, the state owned all the land until very recently, so it's a problem, and hence it's a service, this building. It's nice to be doing something that's useful to them. I think it's quite clear how that works. So at the same time, we also won this tower, which is called Lift Tower, and I named it, but it's not a good name. It sounds corny. And I want to switch it to Circle, Square, Triangle, but I think that's going to be hard. I don't know if it's possible. Because they don't remember architects' names. They don't remember addresses. They only remember titles of buildings, so they refer to everybody's building as whatever title it is. It's quite a problem. But I think we won because we lifted the bottom up and we made a kind of transparent public space that you could walk through at the ground. Bah. And we somehow, believe it or not, won. We somehow won the competition with like this core layout, which doesn't really work very well. We had this idea that you would just sleep in the middle bar, and that then you would have like public or shared space in the three shapes. But now this is like today's work. Like I had the guy in my office sent this today. Now what they want is like small rational apartments. And apropos that circle that I just said, I recently got obsessed by, okay, I want to optimize everything. Like they want to jam bedrooms in. It's like, I'm going to jam bedrooms in. Like still you have wacky things that don't work, and I don't understand why somebody wanted to align that wall with that wall instead of that wall with that wall. But that's like the new thing that I'm trying to work out for myself, like how to make efficient floor plans, because I'll show you, we're going to get to more built projects that are not rational. I mean, I don't think they're unreasonable or even bad, but it starts out thinking maybe I can't do it. It's also 40 floors, and I'm sure it'll start soon. And here, back with Igor and Aitor and arquitectura-G and Pablo, Bofil and Luna, we're doing a really fun project in Benin, in Cotonou, which is in West Africa, if you don't know. And what we were asked to do was an arts center and a running track and a sports center, and they want to do concerts there, and it has to do a lot. It's for after school activities. It's a philanthropic endeavor by the people who live there, so it's not paid by the government, but it's not foreign. It's not like an NGO or something like that. It's the sort of family of the political people who are running the country, and what they asked for was, there's a fashion studio. There's so many different programs, and it's quite a nice site actually, and what we propose here very simply is, and there are so many different models, again, all of which are made here in Barcelona by my dear colleagues and not by me. It takes a lot of work, and they're very beautiful. Thank you, guys. And this is the old scheme, but somehow in this photograph you see it perfectly. Basically the running track becomes the roof, right? The running track is the biggest thing, so it becomes the roof, so it's the one thing, and then somehow underneath becomes the arrangement. So you have the kind of clarity again, and let's say the uncertainty of below. So somehow we scatter, let's say, the various program that was requested down below, and we use the running track to make the roof, because it's really hot there, obviously, and you need roof, and you need semi-outdoor space and indoor space. And so, in fact, like all of what's underneath is the place of activity, let's say. And then all this in-between spaces, all this under spaces, this wrapping around, that's like the life of the place. And it's, on the one hand, a huge project, and it's really massive. On the other hand, it's fairly human scale. I think we just lowered that the free height is 325 or 320. And here's like the much grander model, and you start to see, here you're looking at an amphitheater, a dance center, a library, a little kiosk, there's a place for basketball courts, there's another sports hall, and then the middle is left open, both as a kind of general act of generosity, but also to actually have like a real big open space, to have a concert, to have a show, to do whatever you want. And you don't have to, and again, like the rule that we made for ourselves becomes the driver of the whole story. And of course, the running track is the running track. So the biggest project that's built is called Kurversenstrasse 142. It's not a great name. Sorry about that. I didn't anticipate that I'd be talking about it years later. At the time, although I never came up with a better name. Johanna Meyer-Grohbrügge and I started our office, and we put together what's in German called a Baugruppe, which just means building group, which just translates to a group of people who get together and convince a bank to give them many mortgages on one construction project. It's kind of a lefty German thing, but it exists here too. And I had a lot of time. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a bunch of other projects. I didn't, I was working on that kitchen thing already, perhaps. Or maybe, I think actually this comes before even starting that kitchen thing, because basically the kitchen came out of how long this took. It's on a corner in Berlin. It's on like the roughest corner in the whole city in a certain way. It's been a strict where you can buy sex since 1870, which is quite cool. I mean, it's quite historic for Berlin. 1870, it's like the hooker, the red light corner. It's like, wow. So it's still like that. Like they said, good morning this morning, like every morning. And so it's got, and Berlin looks like today in Barcelona, but like every day. Right, like every day is cloudy and crappy. It's not. It's colder. I mean, it's just it's bad. It's not nice. It's not nice. So it's got this like serious, sex work happening. You can buy heroin right there. That's north, and then this is like a kindergarten in south and beautiful. So the first kind of rule. I go through all this to explain like the 3 decisions, and then it's clear sort of how we came to the whole thing. So it's got to pass through. All the apartments have to have both. So you can't jam somebody just in the corner. And then the other thing which I find, again, making fun of the Germans, same time period, they fucked the world twice, right? I mean, and that's not counting the Berlin Wall, which would be a 3rd time, right? So they screwed it up in such a significant way, decade after decade, right? And so their idea, which is quite comical as an urban planning situation, is like the rule is 1890. The rule is like the 20th century did not happen, and you have to build out the 1890 block. That is the rule since 1994, right? I mean, wow. So obviously my first thought is like, fuck you. Let's figure out like what's the edge of the block. So that's premise number 2. And then premise number 3, which is sort of straightforward and totally opposing all those other floor plans I just showed you, was like big spaces and small spaces as opposed to all the same rooms, right? So that gets you to not this option, but this big space, small space, apartments pass through too many staircases, obviously. All right, like trying to stack them, so like all kind of private functions, bathroom, sleeping, etc., in like the white, public, etc., so dividing by program per house. Not great. This was like each volume has its own room type. And then Johanna and I started to like open it up and try to figure that out. That got a bit crazy, and of course you bump your head on half of there. But this is what it comes down to be. It's 6 towers that overlap, and they're parallel to the other 2. They're parallel to each other's street. You'll see that in a second. So one street is parallel to like the one set of towers, and the other street's parallel to the other set of towers. And they're double high, and then they jam into each other. And that gets you those 3 things. So you end up with double high spaces always at the facades, and you end up with small spaces towards the middle at the overlaps. It's really like it takes a second to get, but I promise you, like, it's simple. It's really like, it's not, I know I'm not trying to convince, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. I am trying to convince you that it's simple. But what I'm really trying to say is like, it follows a kind of logic, and once you play out that logic, then you can have all the freedom you want without having to think about it too much. And so what that means here, this is looking at those are like three, what I just called 3 of the 6 towers, right? What it means is that the lines from outside are going inside, and you have kind of, in a way, flats bleeding into other flats. And so they're all kind of woven together. I mean, just focus on any one part of this section and you'll be like, oh, you don't know where the divisions are, because the divisions aren't straight. They're, as the white walls don't matter. The only thing that matters is the slabs, right? So you know that that slab is coming in, but that space belongs to there sometimes, or to there. I hope that makes sense. And as a result of this folding and so forth, you see into each other's flats. So looking out one window, you see into the next flat because it's wrapping around, and you see a sex worker down below doing whatever she's doing. And so you have this like incredible exposure to each other. And that then means that you have to kind of act with your neighbors in mind, sort of. I mean, you can, because it's Berlin, like you can stand in the corner of your flat in an all-glass building completely naked. Like that is completely permitted, but you just have to be aware that like that puts you in relation to a lot of things, which is fair enough, right? It's not a courtyard house. But somehow what I didn't quite anticipate is how important it is that you see each other. You know, my clients at various points were like, I'm a little worried about this, and I was like, you're gonna put curtains up like everybody does in the world. But actually it's really great, and this is my current partner, Barbara, and this is looking from one flat that where I live to my office, which seems very panopticon-ish, but she's my partner and she does whatever she wants anyway, so it's fine. But somehow what it means is like you're not alone in the world, right? Like it's a really like weird small little thing, but you know, we look at our phones. I'm no better than anybody else. Like I look at my phone all the time. I have like a very kind of interior life, and I really like that when my office is there, but also the old lady who lives next to me on the other side, or whoever else comes home, it's not like the light goes on and I suddenly see it in my bed, but I know that she's home. Like I look out my window, I see people coming and going, and I think that everybody in my building, in this building, has like a little bit more connection. Like you could talk about the community and the fact that we built a building together, which is a real thing, but that's like a lot of fighting, and it's a real bitch to get 25 people to agree to make that building, and they deserve an incredible amount of credit. But the kind of more subtle thing, there's no shared room that we use. Like we don't play ping pong together, but we do this. You know, that was the us. God, she's really, I took this photo, but I also looked like a lot younger back then. But somehow what you get out of it is like a connection and a community. In the future, I show that one when I talk about the slabs. Sorry for the brightness, but you get the point, surely. And you see that it's the 6 towers and they overlap, and that right. So like high L, low space, high T, low space, high T, low space, low space. No, maybe that doesn't clarify anything, but it's there. So you have this kind of feeling in the best of times that you're like on a kind of cliff edge, that you're like in a kind of camping situation. Right, and so as Igor just observed, this is my flat where it's just like stuff everywhere that's constantly moving from one day to the next, and I'm trying stuff out and I'm moving everything. And I think that this house is very, very well suited to letting everything move around, to like being free and flexible and experimenting with kitchens. Although I didn't put the triangle bed in because I didn't want to say you needed to have this fucking weird house to have a triangle bed or vice versa, and that's too much. So there's a limit that, to the readability. But, it works quite literally really well to just like put your kids in a tent inside there, and then they have like this kind of feeling of in between inside and outside all the time. And that's, extremely important to me. More vases. That's all I got.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Any questions for Sam? It's a great opportunity to ask him something. Igor? No? Question? No? Okay, so...
I just want to say hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Very good. No, truly.
I'm really liking how your work has evolved and how it maintains its freedom and anarchic quality over the architecture. I just want to say I enjoy your presentation.
Thanks. Thanks. I'll take it. I appreciate that.
Remember? No.
Yes. Hi.
I have to say that you have books by Apartamento outside if you want to buy.
Do you?
The monograph. Yeah.
Oh, so professional, Moises.
And if there is no questions, we have beers upstairs, so maybe then you are not so shy and ask him some questions in personal. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, beers.
Beers.